affirm their destiny. La 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 la. Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand. La 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 la. Leave the past, a new tomorrow waits for all who understand.
We want to thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We were told of all the cities in India that Chennai loves music the most. And so we thought it was appropriate to start with the choir singing a couple of songs and also with the chant. David Ji and I want to talk about a subject very dear to our hearts, which is the message of Paramahansa Yogananda and the Kriya Yoga masters. And I want to talk primarily about two aspects of that. We could talk for months about all the facets. It's like a beautiful diamond with hundreds and hundreds of facets to it. But in a limited time, I want to talk especially about two aspects of that. The first is, what is Kriya Yoga and what is that message? And then secondly, I want to talk about how relevant it is, not just as a philosophy, but how relevant it is to the daily lives that we all lead, and how it can improve those lives, improve our lives, to help us be more peaceful, to help us be more joyful, to help us be happier, and to help us share more and have more compassion, so that it doesn't improve life only for you and me, but it improves life for all of those around us, all of those that we touch and whose lives touch ours. But first, let me talk a little bit about what Kriya Yoga is. Specifically, Kriya Yoga is a technique of meditation, and it's a technique of working with conscious control, associating the breath and a flow of energy, so that through deep meditation we withdraw the energy that normally goes out and attaches us to the world and brings us into a sense of happiness lying outside of ourselves, that our fulfillment is in what we achieve, what we possess, who we're associated with, what our status in life is. So most people in the world have given the sense of their own, the control of their own happiness, their own well-being, to things that are outside of themselves. And it's no good just to tell people you shouldn't do that. There was a beautiful statement by Ananda Ma, who is beloved of, she's not a teacher of our line, but very beloved. She was not only had a beautiful meeting with Paramahansa Yoganandaji in 1936, but our teacher, Swami Kriyanandaji, often used to go and spend time with her ashram. But she said that joy is the natural food of the mind, and we will always be hungry until we're able to fill our minds with joy. And she further told her disciples, if someone is seeking something in the world, if someone is seeking a partner or a job or possessions, whatever they might be seeking, don't try to stop them. They're hungry. They're hungry for joy. They're hungry for happiness. And until they find the true food for the mind, of course they're going to seek things in the world. So don't try to stop them. Just try to give them more of the true food of joy. And so Kriya Yoga works in order to help us withdraw the energy that normally goes out, and withdraw it and uplift it. And the center of joy, where we meditate normally, the center of joy in the body is at the kutastha, at the spiritual eye. And if we can hold our consciousness there, uplift it and hold it there, then the innate joy of God, the innate joy that resides in each of us, becomes the food that fulfills us. And so Kriya Yoga is a technique that helps us achieve that. It's also, the meaning of Kriya Yoga is action. And so Kriya Yoga is not just a technique for meditation, but it's a whole way of living in this world. It's not enough for us to achieve joy for a little while in our meditation room or our puja room, and then leave our spiritual life hanging on the wall of our meditation room and go out into the jungle of daily life and compete and try to climb over the backs of other people to perhaps act adharmically. We have to bring our spiritual life into our daily life. And that's one of the prime messages of this great line of Kriya Yogis, that the time has come to merge daily life and our spiritual life. And I would like to talk a little about that theme. Now, Kriya Yoga is a technique that has been known for millennia. In fact, Paramahansa Yoganandaji said that when anyone is a sage who meditates deeply and who has direct contact with the divine, they will rediscover Kriya Yoga or a technique similar to it, because it has to do with our own central nervous system. Yoganandaji said that the true altar is not a temple where we go to worship, or a place that we place images or murtis. The true altar is our own central nervous system. And the images, the murtis, the temple are meant as aids to help bring us into contact with our own higher self. And so that true temple that we're trying to awaken is a portable temple. Our own nervous system is not, we don't leave it when we finish our meditation. We carry it with us. There was an American humorist named Mark Twain, and he said, somebody asked him if he ever took a vacation, and he said, well, I would love to take a vacation, but unfortunately that fellow Mark Twain always has to come along with me. And so it is that it isn't enough for us just to meditate, and even with a very high technique like Kriya Yoga, it's not enough to meditate and have some nibble on the food of the mind, which is joy, and then leave it there. We have to learn how to bring that and integrate it into our daily life. So there's a lineage of the Kriya Yoga masters. As I said, this technique has been known, especially in India, for millennia, because it is the premier technique of meditation. India truly is the guru of the world. And the reason for that is not because of literature, not even because of the Vedas, which are wonderful, but the living reality of India is that it has been for thousands of years the home and the place that supports the meditation and self-realization of great masters and siddhas. And because of that, because this is the locale where moksha is revered, where self-realization, the connection with God, is supported and uplifted, that's what makes India the world guru. Someone once said that you can tell the quality of a culture by who the heroes of that culture are. And if you think of most cultures, their heroes are businessmen or military people or movie actors. Not that movie actors aren't popular in India, but the real heroes of India are the spiritual teachers. Nowhere else in the world would the whole country come to a stop because on the television set was being presented the Mahabharata. I can guarantee you that in America, the traffic would not stop for the Mahabharata, but in India, it did. And so because of that reverence, because of the great love of the divine, that's what makes India the hallowed ground. And Paramahansa Yogananda ji, his last words were he was reading a poem that he had written called My India. And the very last words he spoke was, my feet are hallowed. They have touched that sod. And with the word sod, it became a sigh, and he went into his final union with God at that time. So India is a very precious, sacred holder of this great consciousness of union with God. But now we're coming into a different age where India no longer is in isolation. No country will be able to remain in isolation and separation. Our Param Guru, Sri Yukteswar, was a great scholar, he was a great mathematician, and he was a great astrologer. And he said that there is a movement of the sun, our solar system, closer to the center of the universe, of the galaxy, where there's a great, great, powerful energy source. That as we move closer to that, the ages, the consciousness on earth become more enlightened. At the closest point, we enter the highest age of Satya Yuga. And then as we begin to go away from that, we have Treta Yuga, Dwapar Yuga, and Kali Yuga, when we're farthest away, when we're at the lowest point of consciousness. He further went on to say that this is a 24,000-year cycle, and that the low point of that cycle was about 500 AD, and then ascending, we're in an ascending age from that time on, and coming into about 1900 or so, there's a bridge from 1700 to, about 1700 began the age of Dwapar Yuga. Now we're in an age of energy, but among the other things of that age of energy is that we can tell this world is growing smaller. This world, one of the primary effects of Dwapar Yuga is that the delusion of space begins to disappear. So 200 or 300 years ago, 500 years ago, to speak of America wasn't even thought of, wasn't even discovered. Other countries were known a little bit, but nothing like today. Now, I hope all of you have suspended your mobiles, but if one of you hadn't, and you get a call on that mobile, you don't know whether that call is coming from Chennai, from China, from America, from Australia. It could come from anywhere on the whole planet, because now we're beginning to see a communication between all areas. But if we go into an age of coming into a shrinking world, if we go into that in an imbalanced way, then it won't lead to our own happiness. This is what spirituality is all about. It isn't about some, I don't know, it's pleasing God in the sense that He'll be angry with us if we don't do a ritual or say a prayer in the proper way, and He'll be angry and punish us. True spirituality is about realizing that God wants our own joy. He wants to help us awaken to that joy. He wants our happiness. He wants because He is us, He wants everything good for us. And so the techniques, the true religion, is that which helps us unite with the, one could say, the source of everything good, the source of all joy, is to reunite us with that. And Kriya Yoga helps us with that. But in this lineage, about 150 years ago is when Kriya Yoga was released into the world again during Kali Yuga, because it was a high technique. It was kept away from the general population of mankind because they couldn't understand it, they couldn't practice it. Also during that time, if you were spiritual, you would go away from society, you would leave your home, perhaps go to the Himalayas or go to an ashram, and you would not mix with the world. But the time, starting about 150 years ago, Babaji, who is a deathless master, living in India, again, India is the guru of the world, he knew that it was time in this movement of upward energy to re-release the technique of Kriya Yoga into the world. And so he drew to him Lahiri Mahashaya, who incarnated for this purpose. Lahiri Mahashaya was a great master who lived in Varanasi, and he received Kriya Yoga technique from Babaji, and then he himself asked Babaji, who told him, give this technique only to highly advanced disciples. And Lahiri, it's all a play of God. Lahiri said, may I not also give it to those sincere seekers, the men and women of this world who may not yet be highly advanced, but who yearn to become highly advanced? Can't we disseminate it more widely so that people everywhere, if they're sincere, can learn and practice this technique. And Babaji said, God has spoken through you. And so from Lahiri on, Kriya Yoga was given to his disciples, and there are many branches from his disciples. But among those branches, Yoganandaji's father, Yoganandaji's guru, Sri Yukteswar, were both disciples, all disciples. His mother, father, and teacher were all disciples of Lahiri Mahashaya. And Yoganandaji came with a particular mission. Because of the shrinking of the world, the West, and most especially America, represents a very new country. You know, India is thousands of years old. America is 300 years old. It's like in America there was a fresh slate. So it started at the time of Dwapar Yuga. And India has this ancient tradition, which is good in some ways, but also in some ways a curse. Because if there's too much reference back to this is the way my forefathers did it and their forefathers, that it's hard to stay current. Well, America represents in a certain way a fresh slate where new ideas and new ways of working and new ways of doing business and lots of creative ideas. It's a Dwapar Yuga country. Well, Master, we call Yoganandaji Master. Master said that India and America especially will unite to lead the world into a balanced way of living where you have both deep spirituality and material success and efficiency. And he went further. He said that many Indian souls, meaning souls with Indian samskars, are being born in the West. And many Western souls are being born in India to help bring about this balance, this more equilibrium between being able to function very successfully in the world, but not function in such a way that we lose our deep spiritual desires and our deep spiritual upliftment. One time Gandhiji was asked what he thought of Western civilization, and he said, I think it would be a good idea, meaning that it needed the influx, it needed what India had to offer. Well, Yoganandaji was sent as an emissary by these great masters, by Babaji himself. He was sent by Babaji to the West to live in America and to bring these teachings to America. And part of that mission was because the teachings of Sanatana Dharma, of yoga, of Hinduism have come down through Kali Yuga and are now coming out. Sometimes as we go into a darker age, things that were understood and practiced at a higher age are still perhaps practiced, but in a slightly distorted or in a way that the practitioners themselves don't understand the deep power of it. And so Yoganandaji was able to take the great teachings of India and Sanatana Dharma and cull them so that what was appropriate for this age and the expression of how to work in this age, he was able to present that in America where nobody knew anything. And so it was all, as I say, a fresh slate. And so he went to America in 1920, and in India, he is not as well known as some of the other great teachers. But in America, if you ever mention, do you know the name of a yogi? The first name on everyone's mind is Paramahansa Yoganandaji, because he lived there at the time during the 1920s. he went around lecturing. During the 1920s, he was the most popular speaker in all of America. He would lecture at the largest halls in the nation, go from city to city, giving his teachings, and not only would the halls be filled, like this is filled, but now we're talking 5,000. Not only would it be filled, but people would be lined up around many blocks trying to get in. One time, a man said that, well, yes, these Americans, they're interested intellectually, but they don't have any devotion. And Yogananda said, oh no, you're wrong about that. Americans have deep devotion. I'll show you. And at a lecture at Carnegie Hall, which is at the time in the 1920s, was the biggest hall in New York City. It was the best known venue in the whole country. Yoganandaji went there for apparently a talk, but he began chanting a beautiful chant, He Hari Sundara, but translated it into English. In English, it's, Oh God, beautiful. He chanted that with an overfill audience for 3 hours. Just that chant for 3 hours. And many, many people, the whole audience got into it. Many, many people from that experience went into high states of consciousness. So Yogananda was churning the ether, churning the consciousness and the vibration of America, bringing these teachings of Sanatana Dharma, of Kriya Yoga, and the lineage from stemming down from Babaji through our lineage. He was bringing that to America, and most especially, as was mentioned in the introduction, in 1946, he released the book Autobiography of a Yogi. Now, Autobiography of a Yogi is I would have to say, the best known spiritual literature in America. And it combines with the creativity and the business acumen and the Yogananda said, I love the spirit of Americans that says, tomorrow, why not now? And so he loved that. Let's do it. Let's get to come to grips with it. You know, probably the iconic modern American businessman, if you had to pick one, many people would pick Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple and starting with the iPhone and iPod and all the I's, you know. So Steve Jobs had an iPad on which you can read books. He had a single book on his iPad, and he read that every year, and that single book was Autobiography of a Yogi. At the time of his death, for his memorial service, he ordered, in advance of course, 500 copies of the Autobiography of a Yogi to be given away to the people who attended there. So Yogananda started a revolution. This lineage of Kriya Yoga masters started a revolution in America, and that revolution is vibrant and alive and growing. When Yogananda came to America and started teaching meditation, nobody knew what meditation was. They might have thought of the word, if they thought of the word at all, it meant read a little passage from some book, some scripture, and think about it. Well, that isn't meditation. Meditation is dhyan, it's absorption. And so Yogananda was teaching meditations, but at the time he began, nobody knew what meditation was. Now in America, I just read statistics that say that over 14 million people meditate daily in America. And that's just in 50 years or 60 years. And that consciousness is going to grow and grow and grow. So let me talk a little bit, just briefly, about the other aspect that this great line of Kriya Yoga masters, what another message of this line is that meditation and daily life, it is no longer the time to keep those separated. It is now the time to bring those two together. So bring together the joy that you feel in meditation, or the peace, or the wisdom that comes from it, to bring that into your daily life, to bring it into the kitchen, bring it into the living room, bring it into the office, bring it even into driving in traffic. You can drive calmly with an uplifted consciousness, or you can drive in an angry way, upset. Well, why not meditate, lift your consciousness, and do what you have to do with uplifted consciousness, not with downtrodden, downward pulling energy. And so part of the message, the teachings of Kriya Yoga and these great Kriya masters is that the time has come to integrate our spirituality and our ideals, our spiritual ideals in our daily life. And specifically, Yogananda said that people who are wanting to live a spiritual life, who want to meditate, they should form communities and live together. And our founder, our Swamiji, Swami Kriyanandaji, heard that message from Yogananda, and he began the first of these, what Yoganandaji called World Brotherhood Colonies. He began the first of those in 1968, and I was with him at that time. Since that time, these colonies or these communities have grown up around the world. Yoganandaji predicted that farther into the future, these will become the primary pattern of living in Dwapar Yuga, that as people become more spiritually awakened, and as one could say work becomes less city-oriented, then if you're spiritually seeking, why not live with other spiritual seekers? But I want to come back to the theme of the merging of spiritual ideals with daily life. These communities, of which Ananda is one, and where Daviji and I have lived our entire adult life, compared to other things, it's like a little paradise. We have made a movie, which some of you have seen but will be available for sale, called Finding Happiness. And it shows how you can integrate your spiritual ideals. And when we integrate body, mind, emotions, and soul all together and live in that way, then life becomes beautiful, life becomes happy, life becomes joyful. And not only that, but in the midst of that environment, see, we've been carrying on, this is a scientific age, and we have been carrying on a scientific experiment for over 45 years. Can high ideals be lived in daily life? I can tell you the result of that experiment. Absolutely they can be lived. And when they're lived, everything else that we're seeking begins to come together. We have a school system based on this. Sometimes parents will come and they'll say, oh yes, it's nice to teach children spiritual things and how to be happy and being nice, but this is a competitive world. Your children have to be able to go out and get jobs. They have to be able to get into schools. Well, how does your school score in those areas? The Ananda school scores in the 98th percentile of all schools in America. Because when you have children who are fully integrated, they're integrated and successful not just on what one could call the fuzzy-wuzzy levels, but they're integrated in all other levels. When they go out and our children go out and go to college, they become like pillars of maturity, filled with all kinds of good attitudes and strength and self-confidence. So let me just say that we have experimented, and bringing your spiritual ideals into daily life not only works, but it is and will become the way to live in the future. But we don't have to wait to the future. Maybe the world has to wait to the future, but those of us sitting in this room, we don't have to wait. We can integrate life on all levels now, and that is one of the great messages of the Kriya Yoga masters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Namaste. Good. I heard a beautiful story just this morning that a friend sent to me from the life of Paramahansa Yogananda, who has been my guru for many years. 1969, I came to his feet. And I thought I would just start by sharing this story because in a way of honoring him and bringing his vibration to all of us this afternoon. As Jyotish mentioned, when Yoganandaji came to the West, he lectured back and forth. He traveled back and forth across America, East Coast, Midwest, West Coast, back and forth, South, North, everywhere. And in one of his journeys, he went to the city of St. Louis, Missouri, which is in the Midwest. Happens to be where I was born, but nevertheless, this is where the story took place before I was born. And there was a woman in St. Louis, not very well educated, rather poor, and she could neither read nor write. And she was working in a restaurant. She was the dishwasher. And someone, it was in the evening, and as she was finishing up her work, she noticed some flyers that someone had brought in. And there was a picture on the flyer. And she was so drawn to this picture, she said to her boss, and she was a little bit afraid of her boss because she didn't want to lose her job. She depended on it for her livelihood. She held up the picture, and it was Yoganandaji announcing a lecture, but she asked her boss, "Who is she?" And her boss read the flyer and said, "First of all, it's not a she. This is Swami Yogananda, and he's giving a lecture tonight, just about to start." And the woman, with trepidation, asked her boss, "Could I leave now and go to the lecture?" Not expecting he would allow it, but he said, "Yes, go." And so she got there as quickly as she could, knowing that she was late. But just as she arrived and sat down, then Yogananda walked out onto the stage, and he said, "Is the woman who can't read or write, is she here yet?" And he said, "Please stand up." So this woman, he was waiting for her. And she stood up, and they just beamed love at each other for some time. And then he said, "After my lecture tonight, please come. I have something I want to tell you." So she came afterwards, and he said, thank you, Rajesh. He said, "I know you can't read or write. I have these written lessons which give all my teachings, all my techniques. But since you can't read or write, I will be in the city for 2 weeks. Every night you come after work, and I personally will teach you how to meditate, how to what my teachings are. And how could he know? How could he care? This one little illiterate woman whose heart was drawn to him, who probably had never been given much attention or support by anyone in her life. And yet every day, every evening for 2 weeks, he would teach her, and she learned to meditate. I remember some years ago, Jyotishji and I were teaching a how to meditate class at our center in San Francisco, and a similar story happened. We were offering a class, and as we did every month, but this particular month, as we were waiting for the students to come, no one came. The room was empty. And then finally an older woman entered, and with her she had 2 teenage boys, her sons, and she just simply, and she was a house servant, you could tell, and she said, I want my boys to learn how to meditate. And she had a little brown paper bag. She opened it up, and it was filled with bills that were all rolled up and soiled and old. She had been clearly saving the money for them to take this class. And I didn't want to take her money, but I thought, well, it would be insulting to her if I didn't take it. So those 3 were the only students in that class, the woman and her 2 boys, but they came every week. And believe me, they learned how to meditate. We never saw them again. I don't know what became of their lives. But Jyotishji was speaking, I have to say impersonally, with great eloquence, of the changing of the ages. But in that changing of the ages, we have to remember that the world is moving quickly. The value of the individual is being lost. The value of our place and our importance in the larger scheme of things is being obscured. And so the message of these great masters is once more to awaken us to the divinity innate in every human being. In Yogananda's great spiritual work, his Autobiography of a Yogi, there's, how many of you have read it, by the way? Please raise your hands. Oh, that's very, very nice. That's very nice. I read it when I was 22 and never looked back. But in his Autobiography of a Yogi, he, in the wonderful chapter, An Experience in Cosmic Consciousness, he talks about the day when he was in his guru's ashram, Sri Yukteswar's ashram, and Sri Yukteswar calls, and he was meditating in an upper room, and Sri Yukteswar called down using his birth name before he received the monastic name, Makunda, and he's come down here. And Yogananda was upset, and he called down, Master, I'm meditating. And Sri Yukteswar called again, Makunda, I said, come down now. And he said, but Master, I'm meditating. And Sri Yukteswar said, I know how you are meditating with your mind and thoughts like the wind and the leaves in the wind. Come down now. And so he came down rather shamefacedly. And Sri Yukteswar, who was very subtle, he was nothing was obvious with him. Sri Yukteswar said, your lifelong desire will be fulfilled. And Yoganandaji didn't know what he meant, but he tapped him 3 times on the chest, and his consciousness began expanding and expanding until finally he could see 360 degrees around him. He could see through the walls. He could see past the borders of the city, past the boundaries of India, across the oceans, beyond the planet, beyond the reaches of the solar system. On and on his consciousness expanded until, as he said, I looked at all of the universe, all of creation, as though the lights of a city twinkling from afar. And then he realized that the center of the entire Imperium, the entire created world, was located at a center of intuitive perception within the human heart. And so the message of these masters is to say, if you want to find God, you must look within. If you want to find happiness, you must go within and find that God presence within yourself. And the technique of Kriya Yoga, as Jyotish was describing, helps us. As Master said, new hope for humanity. It helps us to awaken by withdrawing the energy. You know, if we have a pile of leaves, to use the image that Sri Yukteswar used, if we have a pile of leaves in this room and we want to keep them all in order, these fans are not going to help. They're going to just blow the leaves all over. So often when we sit to meditate, people said, well, I want to meditate, but I'm so restless. I can't control my thoughts. Just as in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says to Krishna, the mind is more difficult to tame than the wind, O Arjuna, O Krishna. And so we receive these techniques that pull the plug on the fan, meaning it withdraws the energy that animates the restless mind. It's such a tool. If you want to meditate, if you want to feel the peace and calmness of your own being, and that the moment you step out of your house in each day, the world is like an onslaught of impressions and sounds and noises and fear of what may be. But if you pull the plug on the energy that animates the restless mind, and we begin to relate to the world from the center of our own being, we can walk, as Yogananda said, the yogi can stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. And I have lived this teaching. I have seen in our own life, some of you know the story, some of you don't, our beautiful community that Jyotish was describing was burnt to the ground by a forest fire. Everything was gone. And yet there we stood, and we looked at each other. No one was injured, fortunately. After 8 years of building this beautiful rural community, nothing was left but ashes. But we looked at each other, and for me it was one of the strongest affirmations, not affirmation, demonstration of the power of Kriya Yoga. We looked at each other and we said, today's a new day. Let's begin our life with joy, with strength, with courage, with faith in God, and see what happens. And we were able to rebuild even more beautifully than before. Someone who has seen the movie Finding Happiness, which is in Hindi subtitles for those of you that's helpful, said, I don't understand. Is that community in the movie? Is that the one that burnt down? And we said, yes, it is. It was like the phoenix. It arose from the ashes. And so it can be with each of our lives. No matter how much you feel life has betrayed you or disappointed you or beaten you down or taken away your hopes and aspirations, this is just the way of the world. It is the changing Sukha Dukkha Dham, talks about in the Gita, the alternating waves of pain and pleasure. Don't expect anything more. You never will find it in this world. But through the science of yoga, and particularly Kriya Yoga, we can begin to withdraw that energy. And then what will we do with that withdrawn energy? We raise it up to the higher centers of consciousness so that whatever we perceive in life, we see it with the eyes of a higher awareness. Several people remarked to me in the last few weeks. And, I want to say also, when someone was introducing us and they said we live in California, we live half of the year in India. We have an ashram in Gurgaon. We have nice rooms there. We live there, and then we travel around. So India is our home too. And we so enjoy being here with our Guru Bhais, with our friends, with truth seekers here in India. But the ability to take that energy that we've awakened through meditation and then to raise it up, and then we see the world in a different way. Several people have commented to me, and it was surprising in the last few weeks as we've been traveling around India. They said, you see things in such a positive way. Everything you look at, you only see the good in it. And I hadn't ever thought about that, but I didn't used to be that way. But through the practice of Kriya Yoga, where it lifts the consciousness so that you see the world, if I may say, through a God's eye view of it. Once Yogananda was with some of his disciples, and he said, if you only knew how beautiful you are, I see you all as beings of light. And that's how he saw us. And our teacher, Swami Kriyanandaji, sometimes he would walk into a room and he would say, good morning, all you great souls. And we would look around to see who he was talking to. We thought maybe some great souls had come into the room that we didn't know about. But he was talking to us because that's how he saw us, through the eyes of God, a God's eye view. So the practice of Kriya Yoga, it's not just nice words. It transforms the consciousness. And recent breakthroughs in medical science is affirming this, is proving this by bringing energy to the frontal lobe of the brain, which we can call the Kuthastha, activates the center of joy and peace and well-being and happiness. And so it's not just nice words, it's a reality. You owe yourself that experience to find out, what does it feel like if I can activate that higher energy within myself? How will it affect how I relate to my children, to my husband, to my wife, to my coworkers, to that grumpy neighbor? And you can do it all with a God's eye view. And so you see them and you accept them as a struggling human being. How does that energy affect your ability to address any task you have at hand? With extra energy and concentration, you can bring it to bear and you can come up with solutions, whatever it's about, science or business or creativity or the arts, whatever it may be. But your mind becomes alive with activity in a calm way, in a centered way. Swami Kriyananda, our teacher, wrote 150 books. And they're not little pamphlets. They're generous, rich, deep volumes. How is that humanly possible? We were with him for much of the time he was writing. He would just say, okay, we're going to write a book about this today, and I'm going to write 20 pages every day of deep, concentrated work. And he would do it day after day after day. The power of Kriya Yoga. How does Kriya Yoga affect our health? It activates a life force within us. It detoxifies the blood, literally, through the pranayama that is involved with it. If you have a health problem, you really find amazing benefits from doing Kriya Yoga. Or you can use that energy that you freed up and direct it to any body part. We had many, many examples of this, of miraculous healings. And a friend of ours was a mountain climber, and he was off by himself one day, and he was climbing across glaciers, and he slipped and broke his ankle, and he couldn't stand on it. And he was, as I said, alone. If he didn't get back to where he lived before the sun went down, he would have died of exposure. He was a Kriya Yogi. So he sat there on the ice, he meditated, he drew the energy from Kriya Yoga and from the divine all around him, and then with concentration, he sent it to that broken ankle. And he was able to walk out of there, not without some pain, but nevertheless, he was able to accomplish it, and it saved his life. So in all aspects of life, in our ability to just enjoy the simple pleasures of life, watching a sunrise, seeing a little child show you their little art, refrigerator art as we call it, that goes on the refrigerator, whatever it might be, happiness, concentration, energy, health. This is what's being brought through the practice of Kriya Yoga. And then finally, the ability to transcend limited thoughts. When you feel the divine within you, how can you think this religion is wrong and mine is right? This language is better than that language. We're living, as Jyotish was saying, in a world where space is the concept of space and separation is breaking down. And we have to keep pace with the changing consciousness that's evolving on our planet now. We have to be able to see people everywhere in a sense of acceptance and tolerance. Someone has to start it. As Gandhiji said, we have to become the change we want to see in the world. People sometimes ask us, how do we deal with bigotry and terrorism? By changing your own consciousness and sharing that light, sharing that unified vision that is the message of our of Yoganandaji and our line of Kriya Yoga masters, a unified vision of humanity, children of the one Father, Mother, God, tolerance, acceptance, peace in our hearts. And when we begin living this, we will begin. That's why we sang that beautiful song at the beginning, A New Tomorrow. This is the beginning of a new tomorrow, and this is the message of Yoganandaji and our Kriya Yoga masters. And I would invite you to join me now. I would like to close with a guided visualization for peace and harmony in the world. So I invite you to sit up now and close your eyes. Relax your body as we did in the beginning with our meditation. And concentrate at the point between the eyebrows, the spiritual eye. Feel there as your energy begins to focus. Feel that this is the center of your own being. Keep your eyes closed. And then visualize there a beautiful blue light, radiant. And feel it pulsing with awareness, the God within you. And feel it expanding beyond your own mind, beyond your own body. Feel it expanding, this blue light, as though you were floating in a bubble of blue light. And then feel that bubble of light expanding even further until it embraces everyone in this room. We are floating like soap bubbles that merge in a large, luminous bubble of light. And then feel that light filled with joy and peace, tolerance and acceptance of everyone. Now visualize that light expanding till it embraces all of our city, all of Chennai, all of India. Now feel that bubble of light, that sphere of light, expanding beyond India to all of Asia, to people everywhere. And feel it as though it's bringing healing awareness to those lost in darkness and of hatred and violence. And feel that bubble of light uplifting their consciousness, expanding beyond limited thinking. And then visualize this light expanding, embracing the oceans, all continents, our entire planet Earth, surrounded in a sphere of light. A light that comes from within us, a light that emanates from the heart of all creation, a light known by the Himalayan masters and saints of all religions. And feel that light unifying our planet, bringing us into one world family, children of the Divine Mother, the Heavenly Father, who loves us all. And may we be born anew within, and may our planet awaken to a new tomorrow of limitless cooperation and dharma and divine friendship and joy. This is our duty. It is why God has put us on this planet, to be emissaries for His light.